everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're all about getting you up to speed on the big stuff. The things that really matter, fast.
Without drowning you in information overload. You're here because you want to understand what's actually going on.
Exactly. No need to wade through a million articles and reports.
We do the heavy lifting for you.
And today, we're diving into something that's sending shockwaves through the global economy. Tariffs. Big tariffs. Global tariffs.
The 2025 Trump administration's rollout of tariffs. Widespread global tariffs.
Yeah, this is huge. To wrap our heads around this, we've gone through a bunch of sources. We've got articles from CNN, Fortune.
And, of course, the official documentation from the United States Trade Representative. All the primary sources.
Our mission here is to distill this down to the essential nuggets. What do you really need to know about these tariffs?
Their potential impact, the reasoning behind them.
We want you to walk away feeling informed, not overwhelmed.
Right, so let's break down what we're going to cover today. First, we'll look at the sheer scale of these tariffs.
Just how big are we talking?
Then which countries are going to be hit the hardest?
And probably most important for all of us, how is this going to affect you? What's going to cost more?
And, of course, we'll delve into the administration's perspective on all of this. Why are they doing this? What's their justification?
Okay, so first things first, the scale. We're not just talking about tariffs on a few specific products here.
No, this is being described as a U.S. trade war with every country, a trade war with the whole world.
Whoa, that sounds pretty dramatic.
Well, the numbers back it up. The minimum tariff is 10%.
10%. And that applies to pretty much everything.
Almost everything. Goods coming from almost every single country are going to be subject to at least a 10% tariff. Now, there's some talk of potential exemptions for some goods from Mexico and Canada.
Our NAFTA partners.
Right. But by and large, it's pretty comprehensive.
Okay, 10% across the board. That's already a significant change. But then it gets even more intense.
Right. There's another layer to this. On top of that 10%, there are going to be even higher tariffs for certain countries.
How many countries are we talking about?
60. 60 countries that the administration has deemed the worst offenders. The worst offenders in terms of trade barriers.
So basically, countries they believe are making it harder for the U.S. to sell its goods.
Exactly. And CNN summed it up perfectly. They said, for the first time since Trump's return to the Oval Office, it's not a question of what could get more expensive due to tariffs, but rather a matter of when.
And the short answer to what could get expensive is, well, everything.
Everything. Wow.
So, yeah, this is big. Now, let's zoom in on some of the key players here. Let's start with China.
China's facing a big initial hit. A 54% tariff on nearly all goods imported from China.
54%? That's massive.
And that went into effect April 9th. So it's already happening.
Wow. But it could get even worse, right?
Yeah. Depending on what happens with China's purchase of Venezuelan oil, that tariff could go as high as 79%.
So there's a potential 25% increase on top of the 54%.
It really shows how closely intertwined global trade and geopolitics can be.
Absolutely. And it's not just the big shipments that are affected. All those online purchases people make are also going to feel the pinch.
Yeah, starting May 2nd, that same 54% tariff is going to apply to packages under $800 coming from China and Hong Kong.
So all those popular sites like Shein, Temu, AliExpress.
Exactly. A lot of people rely on those platforms for affordable goods. This is going to impact a lot of consumers.
For sure. And China's not the only one feeling the heat. What about those other worst offenders you mentioned?
Two other big ones are Vietnam and Taiwan.
Major U.S. trading partners.
Yeah, Vietnam's looking at a 46% tariff.
In Taiwan.
32%. And that's a big deal because Taiwan's a crucial part of the global tech supply chain.
Okay, so we've got these numbers, but what do they actually mean for you, the listener? What are you going to see in your wallet?
Well, the Tax Foundation has estimated that the average American household could end up paying an extra $2,100 per year.
$2,100. Ouch.
That's a noticeable increase for most families.
Definitely. So let's get specific. What kinds of things are going to get more expensive?
Let's start with tech. Think laptops, tablets, smartphones.
All the essentials.
China, Vietnam, Taiwan, they're all major players in consumer electronics.
Yeah.
So those prices are going to go up. Even computer monitors.
A lot of people rely on those for work now.
Right. And then there are semiconductors. Tiny little chips that are in everything these days.
Everything.
Pretty much. Cars, appliances, medical devices, Wi-Fi routers, even LED light bulbs. And guess who's the dominant player in semiconductor production?
Taiwan.
So any product that uses a semiconductor is likely to see a price increase.
Wow. Wow. We're talking about a huge range of products.
It's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And then there are the everyday items, footwear.
Shoes.
China and Vietnam supply almost 70% of all the shoes imported to the U.S.
So those prices are going up too?
And toys, something a lot of listeners probably care about.
Especially with the holidays coming up.
It's estimated that around 77% of toys sold in the U.S. are made in China.
Yeah.
The Toy Association is predicting price increases of at least 30%.
30% on toys, that's going to hurt.
Greg Ahern, the president of the Toy Association, said, "It's just not an industry that is built to be able to manage through a tariff of that magnitude."
Yeah, that's a huge jump. And what about clothes?
China and Vietnam are the top suppliers there too. But it's not just them. Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Cambodia, they're all facing tariffs too, anywhere from 26% to 49%.
And those countries are major clothing manufacturers.
Exactly. So clothing prices are going to be affected too.
So we're talking about a really broad range of products here. It sounds like price increases are inevitable, but when will we actually start to see them?
Well, Ed Bruzitois from the Consumer Technology Association thinks that businesses might absorb some of the initial costs.
Try to keep prices stable for a bit.
Right. But he says that within 3 to 4 months, consumers are going to start seeing noticeable price increases as retailers start to run through their existing inventory.
So we're talking back-to-school shopping.
And the holiday shopping season.
Oof. Okay, so that's the potential impact on our wallets. Now let's shift gears and look at how the financial markets have reacted to all of this and how the administration is justifying these tariffs.
The immediate reaction from the markets was pretty dramatic. Reports say that $1.5 trillion was wiped out from U.S. equity markets.
$1.5 trillion, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it shows that investors are worried, but the Treasury Secretary doesn't seem too fazed.
Really?
He's downplaying the market downturn, saying it's mainly due to a correction in what he called an AI bubble.
The Mag 7 problem.
Right, the 7 big tech companies that have been driving the market up. He even said NASDAQ peaked on DeepSeek Day.
DeepSeek being that Chinese AI model, so he's blaming it on that, not the tariffs.
Exactly. But a lot of market analysts disagree. They're directly attributing the market downturn to these tariffs.
They're saying it's the tariffs that are spooking investors.
Jacob Falkenkroon from Saxo Bank called these the broadest and most aggressive tariffs in over a century. He even called April 2nd a liberation day, in a way.
While acknowledging the negative impact on global markets.
Yeah, it's a very different perspective from the Treasury Secretary.
Okay, so if the administration isn't sweating the market reaction, what are they focused on?
They seem to be prioritizing lower long-term borrowing costs, specifically the yields on 10-year Treasury bonds.
Why is that so important?
They're worried about a potential sovereign debt crisis. Reports say that interest payments on the U.S. national debt are now higher than annual defense spending.
Wow, that's a pretty scary statistic.
And Ray Dalio, the famous investor, has said that the U.S. only has a limited window to fix its debt problem.
So the administration's trying to bring down those borrowing costs.
And interestingly, the 10-year Treasury yield has actually fallen to 4.08% since the tariffs were announced.
So maybe their plan is working.
It's hard to say for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but it's definitely something they're keeping a close eye on.
All right, so we've talked about the market reaction, the administration's focus. Now let's get to the heart of it.
Yeah.
Why are they doing this? What's the justification for these tariffs?
The administration is calling them reciprocal tariffs.
Reciprocal tariffs? What does that even mean?
Basically, they're saying these tariffs are designed to eliminate bilateral trade deficits.
Bilateral trade deficits. Okay, break that down for us.
It means when one country imports more from another country than it exports to that country.
So the U.S. imports more from China than it exports to China.
Exactly. And the administration is arguing that these persistent trade deficits are caused by unfair trade practices by other countries.
They're saying other countries are making it harder for U.S. goods to compete.
Right, through tariffs and non-tariff barriers. And they're saying these reciprocal tariffs are designed to level the playing field.
To make things fair.
The USTR said, if trade deficits are persistent because of tariff and non-tariff policies and fundamentals, then the tariff rate, consistent with offsetting these policies and fundamentals, is reciprocal and fair.
So they've calculated what they think is the fair tariff rate to balance things out.
And to bring those bilateral trade deficits to zero.
But how did they come up with these specific numbers?
They used 2024 trade data, import and export data, and they factored in things like the elasticity of imports,
Elasticity.
how sensitive consumers are to price changes, and the tariff pass-through rate.
How much of the tariff actually gets added to the final price we pay?
Right, and they came up with a range of reciprocal tariff rates, from 0% all the way up to 99%.
Wow, that's a huge range.
The average for countries with which the U.S. has a trade deficit is about 50%, unweighted.
And 45% when weighted by the value of imports.
Globally, the averages are lower, around 20% unweighted and 41% import-weighted.
Okay, so they've got these numbers, they've got their justification, but how are other countries reacting?
Well, we're already seeing some strong pushback. The Canadian foreign minister has said that Canada is, of course, in a trade war with the U.S. now.
That's a pretty clear statement.
And it suggests we could see retaliatory tariffs from other countries.
A full-blown trade war.
And this isn't happening in isolation. The U.S. has had a current account deficit for decades. For the past 5 decades, in fact.
So this isn't a new problem.
No. And the USTR has also pointed out that over 90,000 American factories have closed since 1997.
They're blaming that on unfair trade practices.
And they're saying these tariffs are a necessary step to revitalize domestic manufacturing.
To bring jobs back to America.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's bring this all together for you, the listener. What's the bottom line?
The U.S. has implemented sweeping tariffs on a global scale, based on this idea of reciprocity.
And they're likely to lead to significant price increases on a wide range of consumer goods.
The administration says it's necessary to correct unfair trade practices. But a lot of experts are worried about the potential negative consequences.
So the big question for you to think about is this. What are the long-term unintended consequences of this kind of policy shift?
The global economy is incredibly interconnected.
There are bound to be ripple effects that we can't even predict right now. What are those going to look like? That's something to ponder.
It's a deep dive for sure.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.